Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. It's a Wednesday night here in Hudson County. And if we're talking about Hudson County's largest city, then it's always talking Jersey City. That's right, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Fernando Uribe, the host of Real Talk, which you can check out every Monday night, live at 6 p.m. Eastern Time, right here on Jersey First TV. And of course, joining me is my amazing tag team partner, the distinguished editor of the Jersey City Times. Again, you can check it out at jcitytimes.com. The great Aaron Morrill. Aaron, what's going on, brother?
Not much. Beautiful day out. I was just walking in Liberty State Park, one of my favorite places to go in the world, and it was gorgeous.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Listen,
Thank God for the Pessons and all the rest that made Liberty State Park a reality. It's
absolutely. I got to say that walking through a park right now with this level of pollen is murder for me and for a lot of other people. So we're trying to manage right now, obviously, in this change of weather, as they say, but it's beautiful to be outside. But folks, we appreciate you making this a part of your Wednesday night viewing here, whether you're tuning in on Facebook Live via StreamYard, of course, on the Jersey First YouTube channel, of course, on all of our social media platforms. It takes 5 seconds, ladies and gentlemen. I've counted. Like, comment, share, of course, and subscribe here. And we appreciate you, again, tuning into Talking Jersey City. Aaron, obviously, a lot to sort of dissect here, obviously. Great stuff. And folks, if you haven't done so already, for less than a cup of coffee, all right, that's all it will take for you to subscribe to support independent local journalism. And you can do that by going to jcitytimes.com. You can click the subscribe button there. Once again, for less than a cup of coffee a month. Okay, folks? So you know what? You can live without a cappuccino. You can live without your little chamomile tea just once a month. And that goes a long way, once again, in helping to support great local independent journalism like the Jersey City Times. Do so today. Aaron, again, that's those free plugs I like to give you, man. I'll keep getting better at it every single week. So
I appreciate it.
Absolutely. So let's get started. A lot of good stories here in the last week. I know one you published yesterday, sort of a piggyback of what we talked about last episode. And hopefully you can sort of give us more about this. So a grand jury did decline to charge the officer concerning the shooting death of Andrew Washington. I know it's a story that's big on your plate. I know we talked about it last time, and it weighs heavily on the hearts of many within the committee itself. So give us a breakdown exactly why this is so significant, brother.
Well, it's significant because of the stakes. I mean, we had a man shot and killed who needed medical help, and this kind of killing has happened repeatedly. And the police appear not to have learned from past episodes. So it's troubling because, of course, we lost a life here, somebody who was loved dearly by his family. If you talk to his family, he was just immensely loved, and by people on the block. By the way, I had a chance to talk to people on Andrew Washington's block, and they didn't see him as a threat. They knew he had mental health issues. He did experience a crisis, and the police responded and attempted to talk him out of his apartment. He ultimately the police opened up his door, and he came out with a knife, and one cop had a taser and the other had a firearm, and the taser didn't stop him, but the firearm did and killed him. It is incredibly important because this keeps happening. People keep dying, and Andrew Washington's only crime was that he was mentally ill. There is a strong argument that I believe that at least at the level of supervision, there was a breakdown and possibly negligence at the police department, at the supervision level in the police department. The tactics that were used were improper, and I think it's a tragedy, and something's got to happen. Something's got to change.
I mean, I would argue, man, it really continues to put sort of a microscope about police tactics. And we talked about that at length last episode here about, listen, we get that body cameras have been an incredible and invaluable tool for law enforcement, not just only to hold officers accountable, but to protect them. And in this case, obviously, we saw what happened with Mr. Washington. And again, Attorney General Matt Placken and Trenton had a lot to say about it. We know the mayor himself had a lot to say about it. And I would argue it's one of those things that when we talk about public safety and whether or not there is sufficient amount of training, I think, again, not to sort of politicize this tragedy, but I think it's something that, again, sort of raises some question marks, man, that people talk about when it comes to the current administration at City Hall.
Well, the mayor and the director of public safety did what generally people in that position do. They defended the police and said it was justified. What hasn't been done is a thorough review of how it was that the police were unable to respond in a nonviolent manner, and why it was that they were so quick to use deadly force against a man who admittedly had a knife, but these were cops that had had plenty of time to prepare methods to respond to a man with a knife that would have been nonviolent. And I will point out that I've looked at the way other countries deal with people like Andrew Washington. I saw a great video taken from the UK with a similar, exactly the same situation, a man with a knife, and the way the police dealt with it was entirely different. So there's a real problem with the way the police operate in these situations. The solution, they all think, is a program called Arrive Together, and similar programs which bring out healthcare professionals to these situations. But that still will not address how the police themselves address these situations when they're confronted with them. Let's assume that Arrive Together is not available, or let's assume that Arrive Together is unable to get Andrew Washington or somebody like Andrew Washington out of their apartment. And let's assume that somebody like Andrew Washington comes at them with a knife, and Arrive Together can't do anything about it. There are nonviolent ways, non-lethal ways to deal with a man with a knife other than taking him out with a handgun, which is what happened here. There's body armor, there is pepper spray, there is tear gas. There are so many non-lethal methods of subduing somebody, even with a knife. And I'm not an expert in police tactics, but they had all the room in the world. This guy was in his own apartment on his own floor. There were so many ways that they could have dealt with it. There was no rush for them to open the door, which is what they did, and which was when he came out. He came out after they pushed open his door, and they claimed that they were worried that somebody was in there with him. Well, there was no evidence of that, zero. And to my knowledge, there's been no investigation as to those claims. So it was a shoot first, ask questions later approach, in my view. I wrote an editorial about this. So
I remember, yeah.
I'm not going out on a limb on this. But Andrew Washington's case was similar to the Seabrook case before him. Yeah. It was similar to the Eleanor Bumpers case back in the 80s in New York. And there was a case in Jersey City, the name escapes me, just 10 years ago. A woman came at the police with a knife and they shot her dead. The police know that this is highly likely to happen, and yet they continue to respond with lethal force. So it's, to me, I don't understand it, and there needs to be an investigation, in my view.
No, listen, I'm with you on that. And I think, listen, I've interviewed a lot of criminal justice professionals over the years, and, being someone that worked in criminal justice for 10 years myself, working corrections, working in probation, I think, to your point about de-escalation tactics, I don't think, obviously, we have enough of them. And I would venture to guess that a lot of police professionals that I've talked to have always been on my side when I say, listen, I think having additional training, like making the academy longer, being able to learn de-escalation tactics. Case in point, again, I'm not saying I'm going to go compete tomorrow, Aaron, but, you look at my social media, I think, you know what I'm about to reference. Like, one of the great things about learning jujitsu is not just about self-defense and cardiovascular, but it's also about learning de-escalation tactics. You never know when you're going to need them. And I would argue, and I've talked to a lot of police professionals that would say, hey, listen, I think that if this was emphasized more on a statewide level when it comes to training, I think officers would be able to rely on that or a stun gun or pepper spray, for example, as opposed to just, to your point, pulling a firearm. Listen, I'm with you. I get it. In those split-second decisions, someone's coming at you and you have a firearm, almost instinctually, you want to do that. But I would argue that de-escalation really, I think, has to be promoted. And I think it either has to be taught or retaught at the police academy level, or even for a lot of the senior officers that are on duty now to learn tactics.
The weird thing about the Washington case is I think Gigante was the cop that pulled the trigger, but I believe he was the one that tried to talk Andrew Washington down.
Mm-hmm.
And it really did sound like he was trying to communicate with Andrew Washington and try to talk sense to him. However, Washington was in a state and wasn't in any position to reason with him. But they had plenty of time. There was plenty of time. This was not a split-second decision. They knew that he might come out of that apartment with a knife. It was highly foreseeable. This case is going to be tried in the courts. There's a civil wrongful death suit, and assuming it goes to trial, if it does go to trial, I think it's going to be pretty interesting to see what kind of experts the plaintiffs put on and what they show could have been done and what was done, and how the commands came down from up top to open the door and actually confront Andrew Washington while he was in that situation. But we probably need to move on to another case, but another story, but troubling case. And
yeah.
But all of these cases have been dismissed by grand juries, and there have been no indictments of any cops in any of these cases that I'm aware of. I think there was one where there was one in Patterson, I think, where a cop shot somebody in the back. You shoot somebody in the back, that probably will get you indicted.
Oh.
But other than that, there have been no indictments. And I'm not saying these cops in this case should have been indicted, especially if they got their command from above to open the door and take the action they took. I'm not saying they should have been indicted, but there certainly should be an investigation as to how this happened and what they could have done differently.
Yeah, listen, it's certainly a case that I know you'll continue to keep an eye on, and you'll continue reporting on it, and you've done great reporting so far on it. So folks, stay tuned at home, obviously, for any updates on the Washington case. Moving on, get a little political here. Aaron, obviously a good story, but one of your great staff, Andy Malone. Is that Maloney?
No, Malone, yeah.
All right. Shout out to Andrew there. Good stuff. Good column here. Yesterday, titled "Solomon Scolds McGreevy Over Support from MAGA Donors." So just to give our audience a little bit of a context here. So mayoral candidate councilman in Wardy, James Solomon, is taking issue with former Governor McGreevy's decision to accept thousands of dollars from, quote, MAGA Republican mega donors for his mayoral campaign. Now, the New York Post story reported Sunday that McGreevy was, quote, courting MAGA Republicans to attract federal dollars to Jersey City if he becomes mayor. In an email to supporters, Solomon said that McGreevy, quote, admitted to selling out to Trump World. It's in print, and it underscores why we need, bold letters, real change in Jersey City, not the same good old boys. McGreevy did respond by saying, quote, it's ridiculous and silly for Solomon to assert that the former governor was aligning with that group and selling Jersey City out to Trump extremists to advance his personal quest for power. I've been a Democrat my entire life, said McGreevy during a telephone interview with the Jersey City Times, and my focus remains on delivering tangible results for Jersey City families and not serving special interests. Aaron, I'll give you the floor here. Obviously, you know, there have been campaign contributions to the Solomon campaign, obviously to the McGreevy campaign. Let's sort of break this down here. It's not about who's in the right, who's in the wrong, but let's clear up and get some context here.
Well, I think there are two issues. One is the political, and I would say that no Democrat is going to hurt himself by going after Trump or Trump adjacent people. And if you can tag anybody with, the taint, of Trump, that's from a Democratic perspective, of course. You, Fernando, would not see it as taint, but from a Democratic perspective, if you can tag anybody with the taint of Trump, and that's being done by everybody, it's probably a good move. We see Steve Fulop doing it on the gubernatorial level. I think Mikey Sherrill. I mean, everybody is using Trump as sort of the, as sort of as the tomato you can throw at your opponent.
Sure.
If you can liken them to Trump in any way. So
Sure.
so I think it's very predictable. I am not going to be endorsing a candidate for governor, for mayor or governor. We are not going to be endorsing a candidate for mayor. I want to couch this in such a way as to express both viewpoints. I mean, I think Solomon's viewpoint tactically makes sense, or the press release and the claim, because it works for Democrats. Now, the question is, let's assume that McGreevey is in fact a lot, taking money from, and I think there is some evidence of that from people that have supported Trump. The question that needs to be asked is, what difference would that make? What Trumpy policies could McGreevey enact in Jersey City that would be bad for progressives in Jersey City, the people that James Solomon, kind of is representing.
Sure. Yeah.
It's not clear to me that even if you were Trumpy, that as a mayor of Jersey City who's responsible for paving the roads and picking up trash and doing these very prosaic things, that that being Trumpy is a problem, at least in terms of serving, in terms of taking care of these basic city services. There's an old statement: "There's no Democrat or Republican way to pick up the trash or the potholes." That's sort of like an old statement. Now, if you think that city government should be more proactive in sort of in a social justice way or in a redistributive way, then being Trumpy might be an issue, right? Because you're not going to necessarily be as sensitive to the needs of marginalized communities, poor people. I don't think Trumpiness, aligns with social justice or, but certainly the mayor has no authority over immigration, which is a Trump issue. The mayor.
I mean, in fairness, other than just writing an executive order and saying that it's a sanctuary city, which, Stephen Fulop did, as well as Ravi Bala in nearby Hoboken and other mayors, there really isn't much, I think, to your point, the local level, because it's all Democrats running for mayor in Jersey City, essentially. Right. But it's really a nonpartisan race. Again, for anyone that watched my episode with Monday with Bill O'Day, and we'll get to that a little bit later. At the end of the day, it's local issues. To your point, picking up garbage, parking, paving roads. At the end of the day, I don't think whether or not McGreevey's going to be woke or not, I don't think that really weighs on people's minds, though.
Well, I think it does weigh on some people's minds because people are in such a lather and a tizzy about Trump, and I get that. I feel it sometimes myself, without giving away too much, but I'm not sure that it relates to the core functions of being a mayor of Jersey City. I think some people would probably disagree with me on that. But I hear most people complaining about high taxes in Jersey City. So it's kind of, it's people are a little bit schizophrenic, because, if your concern is high taxes, you're probably going to, lean towards sort of a more Republican philosophy of governance. So I think there are a lot of different issues that are weighing here, but I think people are obviously very upset about Trump, and this is an opportunity to take advantage of that.
And in fairness too, on X today, Bill O'Day took a shot at McGreevey, also sort of bringing up an old picture of McGreevey with Chris Christie. And listen, I'm no fan of Chris Christie, despite that he's a Dallas Cowboy fan like myself. That's the only thing I can primarily appreciate about the former governor, but that's it. But again, I think that, listen, Solomon, to be fair, I think is resonating to his base and his voter block, and that's fine. That's the tactic. I think to McGreevey's point, let's be fair. You have to raise money. if you're doing it ethically and you're not breaking any laws, again, Aaron, you're the attorney. You can tell me where I'm wrong in the way I'm phrasing this, but I mean, you have to raise money. And again, I'm not in a position to sort of look into people's accounts. I don't look at ELEC stuff as much as other people do. But, someone like James Solomon, hasn't had a bad few quarters. Neither's Bill O'Day, neither's McGreevy. I think in a race like this, you have to raise some money. And listen, I think at the end of the day, the Kushner family, whether people, as much as Steve Phillip wants to run ads and say that, he's been the guy against Trump and all that, at the end of the day, like the Kushner family's had their way in Jersey City. They'll continue to have their way. Whether or not you're taking donations from them or some other nonprofit or developers, I mean, I think that's part of the game. I'm not trying to rationalize it, man. I'm just saying, like, you have to raise money. And I think for someone like McGreevy, where he's maybe the establishment candidate and they've been having some trouble raising money lately. Again, I don't have all the answers, but I think if we're going to nitpick about how we're raising money, maybe I'm not sure that's the biggest issue in the campaign trail, though, man, in Jersey City.
Well, it's interesting because, McGreevy makes a couple of claims. He says, first of all, I don't come from money. He took a little swipe at James. James apparently comes from a pretty affluent.
He's wealthy. Yeah, he's wealthy. Yeah.
He's got an affluent family. And so McGreevy makes this claim. Look, and who used to make the same claim was Mayor Healy used to make the same claim when we brought up pay to play back in the aughts. He would say, well, why should I have no money. I'm a poor working class, guy. And why should I be limited when you've got Steve Phillip out there from Goldman Sachs who can raise all this money? That was his argument. That's kind of, it's a little similar to what McGreevy is saying. Look, I'm a working class. I don't come from money like James does. And I got to raise money where I can get it. The other argument that McGreevy makes is it's a good thing if I have friends on the other side of the aisle because I'll be able to get things done for Jersey City that maybe, James Solomon wouldn't be able to because he's alienated the, Republicans in Trenton. And, and there is a certain amount of truth to that argument. I mean, if you look at what happened to Steve Phillip when he alienated Murphy, he lost the funding for Pompidou. So losing friends in Trenton can lose you a lot of money. So it's not a completely crazy argument that McGreevy makes. But people are going to have to make, people are going to make their own decisions about McGreevy. Look, McGreevy brings obviously other baggage with him, and that's what people seem to focus on. I watch our social media feeds and I see how people have responded to this. And like people I say the people that are on our social media anyway, overwhelmingly distrust McGreevy. And I think that has more to do with the past than his donations from MAGA world.
Yeah, listen, I think that's fair. Obviously, in there's no polling yet that's really, I think, reliable or available that's going to tell us where the state of the race is right now. I mean, obviously, we have still 5 declared candidates: Council President Joyce Waterman, former Board of Ed President Musa Ali, County Commissioner Bill O'Day, former Governor McGreevy, and certainly Councilman Solomon. So I think it'll be interesting moving forward, to your point, man, how it's perceived. And again, McGreevy was very quick, to your point, about obviously Solomon reacted to that op-ed from McGreevy about reaching across the aisle. Listen, I'm sure, to your point, there are people that have a mistrust for the former governor, and I get it. That's where it's coming from. But obviously, there's still many months to go until November. A lot can change, so.
Yeah, it's amazing. This race is really, it's got to be the most expensive race ever in Jersey City by a mile. And, you've got 5 candidates and they're all raising money, and we're how many months out still? And everybody's doing mayoral forums, and my God, you'd think it was next month.
Yeah,
so these guys really want the job, and there's a lot. It seems the stakes are very high, very early.
No, definitely. And at least thankfully, I could say that going into 2029, we'll get back to having the municipal elections back in May, which I think is a lot better, Aaron. Yeah. In my opinion, I think you start cluttering the ballot way too much when you have everything in November. Obviously, we're seeing that, especially this year in New Jersey. There's a gubernatorial race, there's state assembly races, there's municipal races, obviously Jersey City. Hoboken. It just seems like way too much clutter. Nothing wrong with going back to municipal races like a lot of other towns do in Hudson County. Up here by me in Hudson County, Northern Hudson, all the mayoral races are in May. Obviously next year and in 26 and 27 as well. Speaking about, it's still election season, and another story, a shout out to Andy Malone, obviously with you guys at Jersey City. And folks, by the way, if you're just joining us, it's 6:20 here on the East Coast. Takes 5 seconds. Like, comment, and share tonight's episode of Talking Jersey City here. I'm Fernando Uribe. He's Aaron Morrill, obviously your host tonight here, talking about everything Jersey City. Drop some comments or questions in the comment box there. Obviously, June 10th, it seems like it's taking forever to get here, but it will be here soon enough, man. And obviously, in Jersey City, the 32nd Legislative District, which I've talked about at length. I talked about it on Monday, talked about it on my other show, Talking Politics, is arguably the most progressive district in New Jersey, Aaron. Of the 40 legislative districts, I would argue that LD 32, which again, for anyone at home is not sure, is comprised of the city of Hoboken, the entire Jersey City Heights, and downtown Jersey. So it's really, really progressive. And it showed last year when Hoboken Mayor Ravi Bala went to challenge freshman U.S. Representative Rob Menendez. And that primary was really close because of, the sections of LD 32 that fell in within the 8th Congressional District. So Ravi Bala has decided to throw his name into the ring again. And now he's running for, obviously, in the upcoming primary, one of the 2 assembly seats in the 32nd Legislative District. Of course, his running mate is Katie Brennan. People in Jersey have their opinions about Katie Brennan. I know I do. Others as well. But I think a lot of people have their opinions about Ravi. And this week, both of them landed some interesting endorsements. They landed endorsements again, and shout out to Andy again for great reporting on this. But one endorsement kind of concerned me. And I know that being a conservative, whenever I see someone getting endorsed by the New Jersey Working Families Party, I'm concerned, man. And it says, of course, it's urging voters to send longtime Jersey resident Katie Brennan to the state assembly as someone that, quote, it believes has strong progressive credentials and the potential to send shockwaves across state politics. Aaron, I'll start with this caveat. The reason, and listen, voters in LD 32 have choices, obviously, coming up. They have the incumbent Jessica Ramirez. Certainly, they have a running mate, Yusuf Saleh. They also have, the establishment Democrat candidates, right? They have Crystal Fonseca, Jersey City employee, and Hoboken Public Library Executive Director Jenny Pugh. So pretty crowded field. I would argue the most crowded field of any primary, I think, of all the 40 legislative districts.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah, it really, really is. My concern, though, is that I think there's enough information out there to look at someone like Ravi Bala, Aaron, and it's just, I don't buy it. And again, not because of the personal dislike we have for each other.
Buy?
What's that?
What don't you buy?
Well, I'll just, not to sort of be repetitious about what I say on my other shows, but it's hard for me to take Ravi seriously when you say, I'm a progressive, I'm someone that is for women. Well, you didn't hesitate to kick off a Latina, off the assembly slate to replace him with a white man who happened to be a chief of staff in that assembly seat. So, I mean, really, Ravi, that's just one thing, Aaron, that I've cooked Ravi on repeatedly.
Well, a politician would never misrepresent who he really was, would he?
That's fair. That's fair. But I think also too, Ravi's also raised property taxes 16% in Hoboken as mayor. Spending has gone up. It's like, well, how progressive really are you? And how responsible are you? And I have my issues with Katie myself, but the Working Families Party, I don't think is a good thermometer, Aaron, just because they're so far left. I'm not sure even a progressive district like LD 32 might even really embrace that endorsement, man.
Yeah, again, I'm not endorsing candidates because I really want Jersey City Times to be, to use an overused term, a safe space.
You don't want it to be the Jersey Journal, right? You don't want it to be the Jersey Journal.
Well, I want everybody to feel like they can come and express their view on the Jersey City Times. In fact, somebody posted to Facebook today, why do you keep letting Jim McGreevey, post his stories? Because, I don't respond to most Facebook posts. In fact, 99% of them I don't respond to. And I didn't respond to this one, but I'll respond to it now, which is that I really want it to be a public square, and I want everybody to feel like they can submit stuff to me and that they'll get a fair shake. you know, with such a crowded field for LD32, I have a hard time putting my fingers on how all the candidates differ. Maybe I think you've done more reporting on this than I have. And I think we will do more as the election approaches. But yeah, I think you should enlighten us as to what you think some of the differences are between these people.
Well, I'll just say this, and again, listen,
Besides the Working Families Party.
no,
I mean,
sure. Listen, I'll try to call balls and strikes here as objectively as I possibly can. I think
yeah,
that, listen, and I've said this to Assemblywoman Ramirez. I think she's a good Assemblywoman in LD32. Some issues I take exception with. I don't like her sort of weaponizing reproductive rights when we all know it's codified into state law. Things like that nature. I've said to her, like, listen, it's about property taxes. Like, properties are going up in LD32, in downtown Jersey City, in the Heights, in Hoboken. So, Yusuf Saleh, I interviewed him on my Real Talk show earlier this year. He's got a great following in that ward that he's the current councilman for. Now, again, he's sort of, it's sort of a win-win for him. If he gets across the finish line on June 10th, he'll run in the primary as a Democrat. And because of, the district itself, it's almost a sure win that the Democrats will win those assembly seats come November. So, if he does that, he'll be boosted up to state office. Now, if he doesn't get across the finish line, he can still run for the ward seat that he currently holds. So I think Yusuf's in a pretty good position. So that ticket's interesting. To the HCDO establishment candidates, I like Crystal Fonseca. We're friends. I'm friends with her father, Pablo, as you all know. Folks, Pablo Fonseca is one of those operatives that has been in the trenches. He's been in the wars in Essex County, and he knows how to get out the vote. He's a worker, and you can see that in Crystal. I mean, again, and I think Crystal has a really good chance to get across the finish line. Jenny Pugh, I would argue, isn't working as hard. She's the executive director of the Hoboken Public Library.
Yeah.
That's the establishment Democrat ticket there.
Right. How do they differ on policy? What are they going to do?
Well,
is there any difference?
Well, at least from what I've seen with forums, and at least from people from testimonials, I think what they're just trying to convey is just progressive policies and say, hey, send us to Trenton. We'll be those voices that.
Right, but are they disagreeing with each other over any, or is it basically? I'd be curious to know. I mean, we haven't really done a deep dive into this. We've been so busy with some other issues at the Jersey City Times. We have not been able to, really do as good a job on this as I would like to do.
Well, I'll say this. I think Brennan and Bala have been very progressive in the sense of send us to Trenton and we're going to send a message to Republicans and to Trump. And I get that. Listen, that's great.
That's sort of theatrics.
And at the end of the day, I say to people all the time, Democrats have controlled the legislature for 20 years. It's not like Republicans have any say in what goes on in Trenton. So
but it sounds to me like we really don't have a clear definition for each of these candidates. And it sounds to me like at this point, we're not quite sure, why we should vote for one over the other. I mean, they all probably are coming from somewhat similar places ideologically.
And mind you, the establishment candidates, Fonseca and Pugh obviously are the HCD. And again, there's no county line. So people have to work now. It's not like you just are, the county line was really beneficial, especially for Democrats for decades. And obviously now that's not the case. What I would argue is I think they're all trying to be progressive in their own way. But I think they're also being careful, though, because if you look at their social media, you look at them at forums, there haven't been any debates yet. I know there are debates being scheduled coming up before June 10th, and we'll see what happens in some forums. But I don't think there's anything really distinguishing the six of them other than hey, we have to play up the progressive card in the district because people are eating this up, unlike 33 or 31 nearby.
Right. Got it. Well, okay.
Yeah, definitely interesting. Obviously, another story I wanted to sort of pick your brain about, man, and really, shout out to Terrence McDonald, the editor-in-chief of the New Jersey Monitor. And folks, if you have a chance, check out NewJerseyMonitor.com. It's good reading. Terrence and I don't agree on anything, but we're friends and we're very cordial with each other. And I respect his work. And very interesting piece here, which I know that obviously you featured on the Jersey City Times. And folks, again, jcitytimes.com. For less than a cup of coffee, you can subscribe and support local independent journalism. And that's all it takes to support the Jersey City Times. For less than $3, Subscribe today, and again, makes a difference in supporting local independent journalism. Great piece here, obviously, on, Fulop wants more transparency in Trenton, as we all know, especially with his latest ad that just dropped this week via David Wasson in the Jersey Globe. But what about in his own backyard? Interesting question from Terrence McDonald. Aaron, I'll give you the floor because I'm sure you have a lot to say.
Yeah. I've had a lot of experience with this issue. And it actually segues into another thing we should talk about. Terrence has long been a thorn in Steve Fulop's side. When he was at the Jersey Journal, he wrote stories and attempted to get information from the city about things like what was Steve Fulop doing all day, what was in his appointment book, what was in his what was on his schedule, how was he spending his time. That was one of the first fights that Terrence had with Steve Fulop when he was with the Jersey Journal. Terrence actually lost that fight. Steve Fulop and the court ultimately sided with him, said that this was an executive this was executive privilege, that he could keep his daily activities secret because he was meeting with other city officials and they were debating public policy, and he needed to have the freedom to meet with people to consider public policy, and that was something that should be protected. He didn't want that to be chilled by disclosure of how he spent his time. However, there was a strong argument against that ultimate holding. But Terrence has a long history of trying to get information from Jersey City and litigating against Jersey City. In this case, the litigation is over the records for a police officer who pulled a gun at a party, and who probably should have been charged, but whose record was expunged. And because his record was expunged, the city is arguing that that information about that incident, the Jersey City police officer who pulled his gun at a party, that information should not be disclosed because the record, it's like a nullity. If something is expunged, it hasn't. It's from a legal standpoint, it didn't happen. So that was the argument. Terrence has the best lawyer in the state on this, C.J. Griffin, who, full disclosure, has also done work for the Jersey City Times. It was argued yesterday before the Supreme Court, and it'll be interesting to see how this case is decided. The article is in the Jersey City Times today, and it's also at the New Jersey Monitor. And so there was both. Terrence wrote a commentary about it, and then today he published coverage, which we republished, about the actual oral argument. So I'll let people read that article. Yes, there's a really interesting question as to whether Steve Fulop walks the walk when it comes to Oprah. So I'll just give you one example. As you may know, we wrote an article, or I wrote the article earlier this month about the allegation that in 2005 there was vote rigging in Steve Fulop's election, in which he won Ward E for the first time. It was his first election, and there was an allegation made by a man who was arrested on unrelated credit card fraud charges. There was an allegation made that he had been part of a group of people that went around voting for Steve Fulop using names that were given to him by a man named Tom, reportedly Tom Bertoli, who was Steve Fulop's campaign manager at the time. Tom Bertoli denies that he was involved and is contemptuous of the charge, and you can read my article about this. But there was the informant made a detailed statement under oath about how this happened, including how many vans were used, about where they met, and the polling places they went to, what they were told. So it's a detailed story that's kind of been buried since it happened. It was out there some people in the press knew about this story. Reportedly, one news outlet was basically threatened and decided not to report on this allegation of voter fraud. So anyway, I have asked the city on behalf of Jersey City Times for any records they have of this allegation, because the Jersey City Police had taken the report initially. I have a report taken by the Jersey City Police, which is also in the article I wrote. But I asked the city for any additional materials they had about this allegation in an Oprah request back in December. And it is now the end of April, and I have not received it. I've not received anything from the city. They repeatedly, 6 times, they have now asked for 2-week extension, and I don't expect them to produce anything at this point. But the normal, normally the city has 7 days to respond to these requests, 7 business days, and it's now 4 months, close to 4 months, and I have not received anything from the city with respect to my Oprah request. So I would say that Terrence's question as to how Steve Fulop operates in his own backyard and how sincere he is about supporting Oprah is a good one, because we have seen ourselves that he doesn't seem to be interested in responding. Mind you, the city could easily say to me, "We don't have anything. Sorry," and that's the end of the story, and I'll go away. But they haven't done that. They basically said we need an additional 2 weeks, 6 times. And in that time period, I got lots of information from the Hudson County Prosecutor's Office. They didn't do the same thing. They asked for 1 extension, and then ultimately they gave me virtually everything they could legally give me, and it was a completely different experience. Mm-hmm. So I think on this matter, the press should be more aggressive. And when I say the press, other news outlets should be more aggressive in questioning the sincerity of Steve Fulop's purported support for Oprah, because I know Terrence hasn't seen it, and I certainly haven't seen it. And the question is, if he becomes governor, and there's a good chance he will, how easy it will be for what press remains in New Jersey to get disclosure of important documents.
Well, to your point, it's interesting. And again, folks, if you haven't read it, obviously Terrence McDonald's column is there in the Jersey City Times. Obviously, it's also on the New Jersey Monitor. And it's important that you bring that backstory about Terrence, because again, he cut his teeth here in the business in Hudson County. And obviously, whether at the Jersey Journal and certainly moving on to other news sites now, managing his own, he's been one of those guys, though, Aaron, that has really been consistent in raising the alarm bells about Steve. Because when I talk to people around the state, and listen, we were talking this week, via text messaging, Steve's latest ad, I would argue, was his best ad to date. And it really, if you're not from Hudson County, you look at it and you say, wow, that's really convincing. But for those of us that live in Hudson County, we're watching and we're almost like, sure. and what's interesting about this, and obviously, listen, the polling hasn't really been exact. I think, we've shared some polling results via text about where Steve stands. I still stand on the premise that come the morning of June 11th, probably by a very razor-thin margin. It's a primary. I don't foresee turnout being this crazy amount of people, but I kind of anticipate Mikey Sherrill squeaking it out like 18% to 16%. I think Steve has really kind of come up really big of late. Obviously, a lot of momentum on his side because he's publishing ads. Baraka isn't. Sweeney's ads are still very vanilla. Spiller's ads are very sanctimonious. And the reason I say that is because, I know about the NGA. I know about the shady dealings of it. The problem with Steve is that when you talk to people in Mercer County, Somerset, or like Gloucester County, they're like, wow, Steve is really kind of portraying himself as this outsider. Oh, he's battled party bosses. The problem is that he's been a party boss. and I'm not trying to be like,
don't say.
Yeah. And listen, and that's not slanderous or defamatory.
Yeah.
The truth is, it's like, I get it. You're trying to separate yourself from other Democrats in the
You know
field.
these guys better than I do. You're more plugged into the Hudson County machine than I am.
But
But
the point
my
is,
perception, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that Steve is no longer part of that machine because they don't get along, and not because he doesn't want to be part of it.
no, of course not. No,
It's not anything anti-machine from his perspective. It's that, their relationship went bust a few years ago after, too many fights with Steve Fulop. And that's the perception I get. He would gladly be part of the Hudson County machine.
Well, no, listen, again, he was happy to have the HDDO endorse him back in 2022 when then Chairman Veneri bestowed it. But obviously, when there was an election of a new chair, that changed. And I get it. That's Civil War continues.
But let me, your point, let me follow up on what you just said about people outside of Hudson County. I had a conversation with a friend of mine in Maplewood who belongs to a group of people that get involved in politics out there. And they saw a debate out there involving Cheryl and Fulop and the rest of them. And they were wowed by Steve Fulop. They thought he was great. And I'm going to make a prediction that unless, maybe I'm hedging it a little too much, but unless Mikey Cheryl ups her game, I think Steve Fulop is going to pull it out. And I think it's going to be because he is working harder. He is phenomenally good at media. Just vastly better than from everything I see.
No, he
does fantastic ads. He's got a message that he is absolutely consistent with about going against the boss. He's on message. He doesn't veer from it. He hammers away at it, just like Trump hammered away, at Make America Great. Well, Fulop is hammering at I'm the anti-machine, anti-boss politician. And that repeated emphasis, staying on message, his command of policy, and he does have a command of public policy because he's been doing it a long time.
No, he does. Yeah, no, he does.
He's very impressive. I saw him out near Montclair at a synagogue, and I was impressed. I thought he did a great job.
Yeah.
He's likable. He's knowledgeable. He seems energetic. He seems like all the things he says he is. So I think that if you're not in Hudson County, he's a very attractive candidate.
Yeah.
And there is no press out there in the rest of the state, unfortunately, with the exception of Terrence to some degree, but nobody else is really reporting on some of these stories that we're talking about. So he's been great. And let me just make one more point.
Yeah.
The story that I wrote about the voter fraud, that did not get picked up by anybody. That got picked up by no one. It didn't get picked up by Politico. It didn't get picked up by Advanced Media, Bergen Record, nobody. So if the press was really following Steve Fulop and the rest of the candidates closely, I can't believe that wouldn't have been picked up by somebody. But the reality is there appears to be almost no statewide press at this point.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned that because, well, first of all, I mean, anyone at Politico, whether it's Matt Freeman or Dustin Rasiopi, I mean, Dustin's a worker. Matt's really lazy. So I'm not surprised about that. But to your point, it's a good one. A lot of state apparatuses have not picked this up, whether it's NJ.com, Insider NJ, NorthJersey.com, certainly others. I agree with you. I think it's alarming that there hasn't been this sort of focus on that. And to your point, I think the form you were referencing, if I'm not mistaken, I think the New Jersey Institute for Social Justice had their form at the NJ PAC a couple of weeks ago, and that was streamed live on their Twitter page, and I remember seeing Steve there. Listen, I'm concerned about the fact that, like, if you don't live in Hudson County, certainly he resonates, has a very clear, concise message. He's relatable.
Let me be clear. I don't want to just beat up on Steve here because, I know Steve and that's who I report on. And I try and make it clear that I don't know Raz Baraka. I don't really know Mikey Cheryl very well. I don't know Josh Gottheimer. I don't know Steve Sweeney. I don't know these other candidates or Sean Spiller. I don't know enough about these guys to do deep reporting on them. And plus,
Sure.
we're the Jersey City Times. We're not the Montclair Times. We're
No,
not,
sure.
so I don't want it to sound like we're piling on Steve. It's just that I happen to know more about him than the
No,
press. The
no, listen.
problem in New Jersey right now, from my perspective, is that there isn't an analog to the Jersey City Times for Ras Baraka, for Mikey Sherrill, for Steve is getting undue attention from, in a way, because I'm out there writing these stories, but nobody's writing these stories about Ras Baraka or any of the
Yeah.
other people, or it doesn't seem that way. And the stories aren't being reported statewide. If they are out there, they're not getting to state readers generally, which is a real problem.
No,
And
you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right about that. And I think that, listen, in the sense of looking at the race itself, though, Aaron, I think that there's an enormous amount of pressure. Again, there's no line, but there's an enormous amount of pressure on a lot of these county chairs. Craig Guy here in Hudson, certainly Leroy Jones, the Essex County chair, who happens to be the state Democrat chair, as well as Kevin McCabe in Middlesex, obviously those in Union. I think that Mikey Sherrill, again, there's this perception that maybe she's the establishment candidate. And I think she's kind of relying on the establishment Dems apparatus to get her across the finish line. And for some people that don't want that, or maybe are just anti-establishment, we saw what happened to Tammy Murphy last year, obviously when she ran against Andy Kim. I think that that's what Steve is relying on when it comes to, hey, maybe people are just kind of like going to have a rebuke of the establishment.
This is what worked for him in getting elected mayor. I mean, look,
Correct,
it worked once.
Yeah.
And at that point, he was credibly the anti-establishment candidate because, he was Steve Fulop at that point.
Yeah.
He was a real opposition leader in the city council. That playbook has worked for him before, and I think it can work for him again. He's got a lot of money. He's raised a ton of money. I wouldn't count him out at all. I think there's a very good chance he's our next governor. And I think that it's bad news now. We're venturing out of my area of expertise, which is Jersey City. But, given the backlash against Trump right now, I think it's going to be a bad year for Republicans in New Jersey. Not because you may disagree, but I think it will be because of this, that Democrats are so mobilized against Trump right now. Could be wrong. And maybe it won't happen until a year later when the congressional elections take place. Sure. But I think that it's a good year to be a Democrat in New Jersey. I may be wrong, but
I mean, obviously, listen, it's still months to go until November. I think a lot has to happen. Listen, June 1st is around the corner. You know, those utility prices go up. Assembly candidates have a lot to answer for, right? So a lot of things are going on in November, not just the gubernatorial race, but state Dems, I think, also have to kind of fight back against that, the budget. Yeah. And to your point about Steve and the other candidates, listen, coming up in 2 weeks, though, Aaron, in a span of like 10 days, both NJ Spotlight News and the New Jersey Globe are going to be doing their second and third round of debates with the 6 Democrat challengers, and obviously the Republican candidates as well. Listen, Steve, I was there at Rider University in February. Steve did well, but he was outshined by Baraka and others. He has to kind of not just swing for a double. I think he has to kind of swing for the fences in May coming up, because really it's about 2 weeks right before the primary election. And this is going to be his chance on the stage. Again, it's not going to be 6 now. It's 5 Democrats he's running. Right. It's 5 Democrats on stage. I think he has to be more assertive, but so will everyone else be, because Sherrill and him didn't do too well in February. I think the microscope is going to be on them because people look at them as the 1 and 2 in the race. So
yeah, and the other thing I would point out is apparently, the other candidates have held their fire up until now, and I've heard whispers about an oncoming onslaught of negative ads about Steve that we're about to start seeing. It'll be interesting to see if that happens, but which says that he's doing pretty well. But there's Gottheimer and there's Spiller and there's Baraka, and they're all kind of in this group. And there's going to be a circular firing squad taking place, I think. That's what I'm hearing.
Yeah, no, listen, I think it'll be very interesting. I really think the debates coming up in 2 weeks is going to be a strong indicator about Sherrill, because she's technically still the front runner, according to some polls. But Steve is really closing the gap now. But again, I think that We'll see what the debates do.
Yeah.
Folks, again, we're just about to wrap up here. If you haven't done so already, like, comment, and share tonight's episode of Talking Jersey City with, of course, your two favorite hosts, Jersey City Times editor Aaron Morrill and Fernando Uribe, right here, obviously the host of Real Talk on Jersey First TV. Aaron, before we call it a night here, just a couple housekeeping things. Folks, again, if you haven't done so already, click the subscribe button, and for less than $3 a month, okay, that's less than a cup of coffee, okay, you can subscribe and support strong local independent journalism. You can do that with the Jersey City Times. So again, you want to get summer ready, stop eating that bagel, stop having that maybe iced coffee, get summer ready and get intellectually ready. Subscribe to the Jersey City Times again and do that right now. Folks, again, before we call it a night here, Aaron, before I sort of pick your brain about what you got coming up, folks, if you missed Real Talk this past Monday night, one of my guests was Hudson County Commissioner Bill O'Day. You can check it out at facebook.com/Fernando Uribe Media /videos. Of course, you can check out an hour uninterrupted with Bill O'Day talking about everything in this gubernatorial race. I'll be talking to James Salmon in the coming weeks and Governor McGreevey as well. So you want to tune in for that. Certainly about what's going on in Jersey City. And as well, I'll be talking to some other candidates, Councilman Daniel Rivera and other council candidates in the coming weeks on Real Talk. Folks, again, tune in on Monday nights at 6 p.m. And I'll give you the load on what's going on in election 2025 in Hudson County. So that's all I got to say, though, man. What's coming up with the Jersey City Times, brother?
Well, there's going to be more about our mayor. Surprise, surprise. We've got an article coming out about him and his fundraising. We have some interesting cultural stuff coming out. There's a lot going on at Nimbus Dance, the largest dance company in New Jersey and largest arts organization in Jersey City. That's exciting. And we've got something coming out about the Filipino community as well. So we got some interesting articles, and always we're covering like cultural events, and our events calendar at the Jersey City Times is the events calendar for Jersey City. If you want to know what's going on in Jersey City, you go to our events calendar. So that's a great benefit of becoming a subscriber, is you can know what's going on in Jersey City.
Folks, again, he said it perfectly there. We spend a lot of money on a lot of things, and sometimes we don't need. What we do need is strong, independent, local journalism, and you get it with the Jersey City Times. So don't forget to subscribe for less than a cup of coffee a month. You can help support all the great journalism and the great writers at the Jersey City Times. Again, go to jcitytimes.com. Don't forget to like them, of course, on Facebook. Follow them on Instagram and X. And don't forget to check out Real Talk with Fernando Uribe. Also, like us on Facebook. Follow us on Instagram and X. Of course, you can share tonight's episode from Facebook, and also on our YouTube page, as well as on X, and tell everyone you know how much you enjoy the Jersey City Times, and of course, Real Talk with Fernando Uribe here when we talk about Jersey City. Folks, again, Aaron, we'll talk to you obviously in a few weeks again. We'll reconvene again for another episode. Things are going on in Hudson County's largest city, folks, and if it is, you know, Aaron Morrill and Fernando Uribe are always talking Jersey City. Have a great rest of your week, folks. Again, please party responsibly. We'll see you in the month of May, and hopefully we'll have more to talk about here on Jersey First TV, of course, in the latest edition of Talking Jersey City. We'll see you soon, folks. Again, he's Aaron Morrill. I'm Fernando Uribe. Top Guys out tonight here in Hudson County.